Hello and welcome to Volunteerism Opportunities in Challenging Times. My name is Bernie Flynn and I'm the CEO of Mercer Street Friends, and I'm very excited to have this opportunity to kick this panel off. And one of the reasons that I was asked to be a facilitator is I'm actually a volunteer myself. I am now the CEO at Mercer Street since February of 2020. And before that, I was the CEO of NJM Insurance Group until 2018. So I have made the transition from the corporate sector into the nonprofit world. And I want to tell you just a little bit about Mercer Street Friends before I ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Mercer Street Friends has been around for 63 years. It's a Quaker-run organization, primarily dedicated to general social services, and we provide family and parenting support and counseling. We are also the food bank for Mercer County, and we engage in educational activities. We have a preschool, we have adult basic education, and we also are the lead agency in the city of Trenton for the community school movement. So that is Mercer Street Friends. And now, without further ado, I want to ask our distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. Catherine, would you go first, please?
I sure will. Thank you so much, Bernie. Hello, I'm Catherine Malone. And
Catherine.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you, Catherine.
We can hear you now, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Hello, I'm Catherine Malone, and it's truly a pleasure to be with all of you today. Such a distinguished panel led by you, Bernie. Thank you. As president of JA New Jersey, I manage statewide operations that impact 75,000 New Jersey students annually in collaboration with a remarkably dedicated staff and statewide board of directors. And I'm very passionate about the mission of JA, that being to inspire and prepare youth to succeed in life, and have dedicated 25 years to this critical mission, mostly in New Jersey. And that is a little about me. Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you, Catherine. Saadia, would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you for having me on this panel. My name is Saadia Malik. I'm part of Johnson & Johnson, which is a healthcare company, and I am part of a group called Global Community Impact, where we are the corporate philanthropy group for Johnson & Johnson. So really excited to be here, and just personally, just really passionate about the space of volunteering. I've been a volunteer myself for many years in different capacities, so looking forward to the rest of this panel.
Thank you, Saadia. And Mark.
Great, thanks, Bernie. It's good to have a fellow food banker on the call. My name is Mark Valli. I'm the CEO of Norwescap. We are a 55-year-old organization that addresses poverty issues in the 5 northwest counties of the state, so Hunterdon, Warren, Sussex, Morris, and Somerset. We provide a wide portfolio of services, everything from education programs to employment, health and nutrition. We're the food bank for several of those counties. We do housing and community development work. We do volunteerism. It's a big piece of what we do, so I'm excited to talk about it. And we also do financial empowerment programming, similar to Junior Achievement, Catherine, although on a much smaller scale. Anyway, our mission is to address issues of poverty and to turn poverty into opportunity. And this has been a challenging year, and I'm excited to talk about how we were able to sort of tackle the pandemic with our volunteer partners. It's exciting to talk about.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. It's wonderful to have all three of you with us today. This is a very important topic, as you've mentioned. And to get us started, jumping right in, the elephant in the room is the pandemic. And it started, March of 2020, and here we are still in the middle of it, unfortunately. That's created tremendous challenges. So let's talk about just how that has impacted you and your organization. Catherine, do you want to get us started?
I certainly will. And Bernie, you know a lot about this because you've been such a dedicated volunteer to JA for so many years. You know, JA inspires and prepares youth in grades K through 12 to succeed through real world relationships with business and education partners that help our youth develop the financial health, entrepreneurial spirit, and the employability skills to succeed. And our learning initiatives are provided at no cost to schools or to students and motivate youth to achieve by connecting them with corporate and community role models through volunteer engagement initiatives. So the effect that this pandemic has had is multiplied for our organization in that it has created so much uncertainty for all of us. I mean, the impact on life has been extraordinary, and nonprofits, all of our nonprofits are no exception to this disruption. So for example, once in a lifetime, we at JA created this thriving award-winning operation, expanding our reach 400 some odd % over 15 years with balanced budgets. But when COVID shut everything down last year, we quickly had to pivot to virtual experiences. Our virtual learning replaced classic programs, our virtual fundraisers replaced classic events. And unfortunately, for the first time in 15 years, we suffered a reduction in force that eliminated 30% of our team. So there's so much to talk about around the impact that this pandemic has had on all of our organizations. But you know, while we're in uncharted waters and our children face uncertainty every day, our goal at JA is to create more certainty in every aspect of our organization.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. And I can certainly speak to the pre-pandemic days of being in the classroom with JA and the tremendous experience that was. And we'll get into, you know, how are we adjusting and evolving in pandemic-like conditions. Mark, do you want to tell us about Norwescap and the pandemic for Norwescap?
Yeah, well, you know, like with every nonprofit, I mean, it hit us hard. We run Head Start centers. We run 8 Head Start centers. They all had to be shut down. We do lots of one-on-one counseling through our WIC program, literally meeting thousands of people, you know, once a month. That had to stop. We support daycare centers, which had to shut down. And I mean, it was devastating to us. But what I will say is we had been working for about a year on putting in some infrastructure that allowed us to make that transition actually relatively easily. So we had transitioned to Microsoft Teams, so we had cloud-based computing, but we did have to do things like we purchased over 130 laptop computers so that our staff could be out in the field or out of their living rooms, I should say, doing their jobs. The other thing I would mention is that despite the challenges, I mean, we had programs that were, you know, operating, meeting one-on-one with families and such, but they just turned on a dime and they started delivering food to people's homes. And, you know, we delivered, and Bernie, you can identify with this, we delivered 2.1 million meals since the beginning of the pandemic. And that's both in terms of our food bank delivering to local pantries, but also things like our Family Success Center, making sure that the free and reduced lunches that the school districts had were getting into the bellies of kids. So we had volunteers, you know, business people that were out of work, local volunteers came out in droves and were able to deliver literally over 10,000 meals to kids in Phillipsburg. So while there was big challenges, we had the infrastructure in place to make sure that we were able to tackle them. And then volunteers really helped power us through, made sure that the most vulnerable people were getting services. And the last thing I'd add to that is up in Sussex County, we have a program called Pathways to Prosperity, which is, you know, kind of a group program where they come together once a week and they talk about their personal goals or professional goals and they work towards them in a peer-to-peer exchange. Well, guess what? You know, they found out that families in Sussex County were hungry. And so we not only got the food from the food bank up to Sussex County using local volunteers in Phillipsburg, but then we were able to deliver literally over 400 meals a week, well, 400 boxes of food, I should say, to families that were in need. And it was done by the people that we were serving before. So it was people who were our participants, our program participants, turned on a dime and started supporting others whose challenges were even greater than theirs. And that's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And our viewers are going to hear more about the food-related response, because both of us, as you mentioned, you know, we run food banks in addition to our other social services. And I'll just relate one story that really caused us to change rather dramatically how we distributed food. As soon as the schools shut down in March, our Send Hunger packing program, designed to provide students who qualify for free and reduced lunch to have individual meals over the weekend, and individual meal packets would be placed in a big Ziploc bag and placed into their backpacks on a Friday afternoon, so they could take them home and they'd have 4 meals. Well, we immediately concluded in March that not only did those students need those 4 meals, but that the whole family needed meals. You know, so we couldn't provide them in backpacks in that kind of a distribution. So we created our community meal bags program here in Mercer County, so that we provided about 18 to 20 pounds worth of shelf-stable food in our community meal bags, which we gave out at the schools, but it was on a first-come, first-served basis, designed to provide for 16 meals, so that a family of 4 would get 4 meals over that weekend. It was complementary to the food that was being distributed by the school district. So we partnered, you know, again with our school district in that regard, and we've given out more than 50,000 of those meal bags, which equates to, you know, 800,000 meals just in that program alone. But it was all generated because of the pandemic conditions. And it was a great adjustment by our food bank leader here and staff. And we had volunteers. We were grabbing volunteers the day before distribution, you know, in order to, you know, have them help get that food into the community. So now I'd like to ask our corporate and J&J representative, Saadia. J&J has an iconic philanthropic reputation, you know, that has spanned decades. And New Jersey is your home. So we're very proud of the partnership that J&J has with so many nonprofits and the way you help serve the community. So for you, given J&J's level of engagement, what happened? I mean, what has the pandemic been like at J&J?
Well, thank you first of all for sharing your work, because I think that's what inspires us is the nonprofit sector to do the work that we do. So I appreciate all the stories and appreciate all your work in this space. So I'll start off by saying that Johnson & Johnson overall, our purpose really is to change the trajectory of health for humanity, right? That's our focus. And within our group, within GCI, we believe everyone and everywhere should have access to basic quality health services. And we do this through many different ways, whether it's through grant making, whether it's through product donation, innovation, advocacy. And then one of the ways that we feel that is really powerful is through volunteerism. And what we call our volunteer program is Talent for Good. And essentially it means just that. We give our talent to do good within our community. And so the mission of Talent for Good really is to empower our employees to make positive impact in our communities. And so we have what we call a Talent for Good ladder. And essentially it is a wide array of opportunities for our employees to engage in various ways. There's low-level engagement, something like if you wanted to volunteer at a soup kitchen, you wanted to have a campaign, things like that would fall under that category. And as you go up the ladder, there's mentoring opportunities through our STEM program. There's high level of engagement where we have skill-based volunteering. So there's something for everyone. And our really goal is to really encourage our employees to kind of move up that ladder. So with the pandemic, a lot shifted for us because we couldn't do many of those activities that we have under those opportunities under Talent for Good. So it changed how we work, how we interact, especially in this volunteerism space. So due to the pandemic, a lot of the activities were postponed initially, but then we eventually modified many of them, moving them to a virtual setting. So we know that our employee base is really looking to give back in a safe and responsible way. So our aspiration to really make a difference in this space didn't change. It's just how we went about it. So we had to adjust our way of volunteering in light of the pandemic. So giving back was that was not the question. It was really how do we go about doing it. So there was new virtual opportunities that we had to present to our employees. So for example, like I mentioned, the ladder, when we had low level engagement like food banks, employees started creating websites where they can actually donate food and other supplies to food banks. They started delivering in many different aspects. The mentoring piece, instead of having in-person classroom mentoring opportunities through our STEM program that we partner with actually with Junior Achievement. We started doing a lot of those online. In fact, we had a STEM career panel with JA during the pandemic. So we just had to shift our mindset. And then if you go across the ladder to some of our high level engagements where we have employees actually traveling out to different sites at NGOs, getting that fully immersive experience, that had to shift to a virtual setting. And though it has been challenging, I think we're trying to make the best that we can because, again, like I said, our aspiration has not changed. It's just the way how we're going about it.
Thank you, Saadia, and thank you to Johnson & Johnson and everyone at J&J, for all the contributions you've made to our community here in New Jersey. And I know it's worldwide, but we appreciate it that you're New Jersey's own. So what I'd like to do at this stage, I'd like us to provide a little more context for how we approach volunteering in good times and bad, right? We're gonna talk about the challenges. We've already touched on the initial challenges of the pandemic, but we want our viewers to kind of appreciate how we set up that infrastructure, what our organizational emphasis is, and how is volunteerism an enduring part of our respective organizations. So, Mark, I wanted to kick it to you first to talk about that infrastructure and approach to volunteerism at Norwescap.
Yeah, and infrastructure is important. And I remember Christy Izzo, who was a great volunteer leader. I remember her saying, volunteerism isn't free. And it's true, it's not free. Volunteerism, there's a cycle involved. You have to recruit the volunteers, you have to train the volunteers. Then when you get them, you have to support the volunteers, make sure they have a great experience. Then you want to have them reflect and you want to celebrate their service. So that cycle needs to repeat itself over and over again. And it doesn't happen without some infrastructure in place. So having a good volunteer database is an important piece of that. Making sure that your staff are trained to be able to support the volunteers well. The last thing on earth you want to have happen is have somebody come to volunteer and they feel like either they didn't do much or the work they did wasn't put in context, so they didn't understand how important it was, or they have a bad experience. And I've done that. I've gone to volunteer events where I've had bad experiences. So having that infrastructure in place is actually really important. And I'll give you an example. When we run a program called VITA, which allows low-income people and seniors to have their taxes done for free by volunteers that we train. And literally, in 2019, we brought back $3 million in tax credits and refunds to the people that we served and to our communities. So that's $3 million of federal taxes that came back to New Jersey. But taxes are touchy, right? And especially if you're a senior citizen and you're used to sitting down with somebody and face to face. Well, we couldn't do any of that. We had to do contactless drop-offs where we had to convince folks to leave their papers with us, right? Which is a little disquieting, with all your personal information. They had to leave it with us. We would then take it. We would do it, and we would do it over the phone with them or over Zoom if they had that capability. To sort of walk them through the process. But there was a lot of pieces in place. We had to set up our centers so that you could do the contactless drop off in a safe and effective way. We had to have all the PPE in place. I mean, it took weeks of preparation to get that right. So that's one example of how we had to sort of shift and change something we've done for over a decade to adapt to the climate that we're in. Where you got to stay 6 feet away from everybody. You got to wear a mask, and you got to wash your hands 10,000 times. So adapting to that was not easy, and we had to have the infrastructure in place to do it.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And one of the challenges for me, which I'm gonna rely on you for to a great extent, is because I started here at Mercer Street in February, I haven't experienced a year-long cycle of the traditional volunteerism that Mercer Street Friends has done. Right. So, and all I heard about, when we first entered the pandemic was of all the things that were being canceled, and we couldn't host at the food bank team events, from Johnson & Johnson or other corporate partners, and we weren't getting the food drives organized. So it's been quite a disruption, and I do have pretty good knowledge of junior achievements, traditional volunteerism, and I for one used to bring a team from NJM Insurance Group into Trenton schools and other schools throughout the state where we had offices, and we had a wonderful cohort of volunteers, still do, but they just aren't going into the classroom, and it was a full day experience, a real commitment. And so Catherine, I really appreciate how much a part of junior achievement volunteers are. I can attest to it. I've become an ambassador, for you. But talk about how you generate. How many volunteers do you typically have in normal times, and how do you manage that infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I mean, Bernie, the heart of JA is volunteerism, connecting kids to caring role models like you, like Mark, like Saadia, who are dedicated to their success. And these volunteer role models help young people build the skills and the confidence to be leaders of today and tomorrow. Our volunteers have a profound impact, and you've seen this, profound impact on young people who participate in our programs, and are the backbone of the work that we do in inspiring and preparing youth to be successful in life. So nationally, more than 150,000 JA volunteers, 5,000 here in New Jersey, share their experiences, wisdom, and skills with students, providing important lessons on money management, starting a business, and as Saadia mentioned, finding a career, especially in STEM. That event that Saadia mentioned, that we participate, partner with J&J every year, it's been in person at J&J's headquarters for years. And it was this amazing, inspirational event, bringing together young women and volunteer role models from J&J in person for a day of mentorship. And we've had to pivot online, obviously. How we address the infrastructure and meeting the needs of volunteers from J&J and all of our other partnering companies, to provide these consistent quality experiences for our volunteers. We're infusing technology as much as possible. We're recruiting, registering, enhancing our turnkey volunteer opportunities, our volunteer experiences through technology. We also provide our high school volunteers with a similar format, but in addition, we also provide additional leadership opportunities to support and enhance these JA initiatives. So, it really has been a monumental movement from these in-person events to these now these virtual events, and of course we'll get into risk management and what the future holds a little bit later. But it really does change the infrastructure that you need in order to move from these in-person to these virtual events. Really is it's a tremendous experience. And I think it's here to stay.
Yeah. Thank you, Catherine. Yes, unfortunately, and we will talk about, what is here to stay and what isn't, before we conclude today. Saadia, your perspective at J&J and the infrastructure that J&J has built in order to serve the community with volunteerism at its core. I mean, you're an example of best practice for the corporate world, and our viewers, probably predominantly nonprofit representatives, would love, I think, to get an insight into how that has been built over time at J&J and how it's such an important part of the culture.
Yeah, it is definitely an important part of our culture. So we're really guided by our Johnson & Johnson credo, which is like our overall mission. And essentially it has various parts to it. The credo guides us whether it's how we interact in our business world, how we interact internally with our peers and our employees, and how we actually serve our community. So there's a section in our credo that talks about, it's a whole paragraph about the community and the importance of supporting and giving back. So that's really ingrained into our culture. And so based on that, that really gives us an advantage that our employees tend to be pretty active volunteers, and they're always seeking opportunities to give back. And so, that approach has always been beneficial for our company. But essentially, when we look at our volunteer programs, we try to create what we call a triple win in all of our programs. And the triple win consists of creating value for nonprofit organizations, employees, and the company. So every program that we go into, we look at those three aspects. So for example, through our program, we look at triple win where we're benefiting, say, the NGOs through our expertise, that they're actually gaining something out of that program. Whether it is through our employees where they're developing both professionally and personally. And then within our company, an example of our program where we would benefit for the company would be how do we attract new talent based on our programs, or how do we retain our employees. So when we're looking at every program, we try to keep that triple win in mind. And so that always helps us kind of like figure out what programs we really want to be involved in and how to position them. So going to the question around infrastructure, it's really important to have some of the tools that Mark and Catherine also mentioned around how to support these initiatives. And so we have, internal portals where employees can actually search for opportunities, where they can log in their hours. They can even post opportunities that they hear about. We also get a volunteer feed from Volunteer Match of the different opportunities locally that employees can participate in. But beyond that, we have other tools and resources like frequently asked questions, policies around volunteerism. So all of that has been in place for a while, but because of the pandemic, we had to replicate very similar tools and resources to accommodate this new world. So it is similar, but we had to adjust it so we can accommodate the virtual world, however our volunteers will be engaging. We also have communication channels that we use to really highlight our programs and use those channels to kind of enhance these opportunities for our employees. But I think most importantly, I'll probably end with this, saying that we try to integrate the company culture by incorporating a lot of these programs into development initiatives for our employees. So to reinforce Talent for Good as a way that employees can grow both personally and professionally while giving back, we encourage our leaders to really promote the programs as part of teams' growth and development. And so I think that helps kind of the culture come to life. In that sense, but additionally, beyond those internal measures that we have, we really encourage storytelling, because storytelling can be really powerful internally, right? How we see and do things and how to convey that story can be really a powerful tool for other folks to get involved and get inspired, and just to even learn about causes that nonprofit organizations are working on. So I would say that those are really some of the key aspects of how we integrate our volunteer culture into our business.
Yeah, thank you, Saadia. Now tell me, as much as you can, as far as the number of employees at J&J dedicated primarily to community engagement, and what kind of lift do you have in terms of influencing senior management and the board? Give us a little about that your capacity within J&J.
Well, we try to engage key stakeholders from the beginning of our program, so we have that buy-in. But beyond that, we try to integrate our Talent for Good program and educate employees at the beginning. So when they're being onboarded as new employees, or we have different avenues like the leadership development program that we have in different functional areas within Johnson & Johnson that we use to really leverage some of these opportunities to educate, communicate to our employee base about our programs. And as I mentioned, storytelling is really powerful as well. So I think those are some of the key aspects of how we kind of really encourage leadership and management to do that. And like I mentioned, it's part of our culture. So many leaders see it as one of their goals to have their employees involved. In fact, we have a lot of departments that actually reach out to us, a lot of functional areas that want to give back as a team. And so they look at a lot of the annual team meetings, or whether it's quarterly team meetings or town hall meetings. They want to take an opportunity, a chunk of that time to actually give back, and because they know it's important to the company, and it's just the right thing to do. And I think that just speaks to the culture that we have.
Yeah, thank you, Saadia. Well, we provided context for our viewers with regard to our organizations, the overview as it relates to the pandemic, our infrastructure, our emphasis on volunteerism. Right now, I want to ask all three of you, with this darn pandemic, give me the most surprising challenge, anecdote, whatever, the thing that you're like, I can't believe that we're doing this now because of this pandemic. Saadia, I'm going to come right back to you. What's the most surprising thing, the biggest challenge, the anecdote that describes this pandemic and how you've managed?
Yeah, I think just to remain engaging, right, for employees, for the NGOs, it's challenging because there's a certain aspect of being together in person, that human connection that is being lost a little bit in this virtual world. So you have to sort of come up with creative ways to engage better and to really understand ultimately what the goal is, right? So I think, when we look at our nonprofit organizations, we always understood we have deep partnerships with many of them, and we always understood what their needs were. And then when the pandemic hit, their needs in a way for a certain time shifted. And so we couldn't just resist from that, right? And so we had to sort of go with the flow and kind of understand, because that is part of the partnership. And I think that's one of the silver linings of all of this, is that in all of us, we've learned a certain level of resilience. We've seen NGOs be resilient, and I think we've truly seen what it means to be a partner. It just doesn't mean that you push whatever you're trying to do and whatever your objectives are, and vice versa. It's really about understanding what the needs are and kind of coming to an alignment. And I think that's been really the positive thing about all of this, along with some other aspects of it too. But I think that those type of things and those partnerships have really come out, and the value of those.
Yeah, Catherine, how about you? What's the big challenge that or the most surprising thing as a result of this pandemic?
Yeah, wow. Each school and district utilizing technology and digital learning differently, and each with their own privacy policies. We are navigating this uncharted territory as our students are looking to continue learning from and connecting with our volunteer role models. We know the school year is quite challenging for many children as COVID continues to disrupt in-school learning. But now more than ever, our children need hope and inspiration and mentorship. Mental health issues are heightened and classroom engagement is challenging. And there's a lack of connection to peers and caring role models, which is greatly impacting our kids. And that all being said, we know that we need to be there now more than ever, and we need to continue to find innovative ways to reach these young people. One of the ways that we're reaching these young people, or we're going directly to the students and or to the youth and to their parents, and we're signing young people up for our hackathons, for our coding workshops, for our Women's Future Leadership Academy, because we know that there's just so much disarray right now in schools. And but at the same time, we really do want to reach these young people. So, with that, there is also the increased awareness around risk management and around risk mitigation and ensuring that young people are safe and our brand continues to remain strong. But it really, COVID has really challenged schools and school districts and educators in ways that I never could have imagined.
Yeah, no, so true, so true. Life has changed considerably, and our work has changed considerably. Mark, what are your thoughts around the surprises and the unexpected challenges?
Everything was unexpected.
Yeah. That's true.
It was a new day every day. My favorite story is we had this. I mentioned our Family Success Center. They started right away as soon as the Phillipsburg school shut down. We knew that there were thousands of kids who weren't getting their free or reduced lunch. So our Family Success Center pulled together a team of volunteers that met daily at the school district. The school district committed to continuing to provide those meals. So our volunteers would show up in the morning, pick up the meals at the school, and then drive them to families' houses during the heat of the lockdown in March and April. And there was a fellow there, an entrepreneur. This guy literally has 3 businesses that he runs, that he started himself, and none of them could function. So he was out there every day delivering meals. Dozens of meals to families and kids to make sure that they had a good meal in their stomach. And that to me said everything I needed to know. So we had, local volunteers, which made some sense, but this guy drove from Hunterdon County up to Phillipsburg every day to make sure the kids were getting the nutrition that they needed. And that to me said a lot about just the goodness of people, and frankly, the importance of volunteers, because he made a difference for literally, hundreds of kids, on a daily basis, while his businesses were shut down. So, that's a wonderful story. But the other story I would talk about is, and this is where nonprofits sometimes forget to be selfish, right? We forget that we're a business. We don't make money and give it to shareholders, but we do need to make enough money to be able to serve our clients. And so when we were doing all this work, when we're delivering meals in Sussex County and in Hunterdon County and Warren County, when we were doing all that work, we were posting it on social media. Again, that was a piece of infrastructure we had built over the last year and a half. So it was important because then what happened is people started contacting us. And they didn't want to volunteer per se, but they were saying, hey, how can we support you? Well, we launched an online campaign. We dressed up our website so that there was an easy way to donate. And literally hundreds of thousands of dollars. Everything from the small $5 donation from the lady at the local church to the $100,000 donation from the big corporations. So we raised well over $450,000 in short order, frankly, because we were telling people what we were doing. We were showing them our volunteers in action, and it made a big difference, and it really helped support the work that we did. And I think that's an important lesson for nonprofits to understand, that it's okay to tell your story. Saadia mentioned it. Tell your story. It's important. and people want to support. And we called it our resiliency campaign, and you know, frankly, it helped us be more resilient.
Yeah, Mark, I mean, it's so true. And I think, you know, we do want to talk about risk management, you know, generally, but, and I will kick it off in the sense that, you know, our experience, similar to yours, Mark, in that, and the theme that Saadia introduced, the storytelling was so necessary at the beginning of the pandemic. When I arrived on the scene here at Mercer Street, we didn't have the infrastructure in place to tell our story as frequently and as clearly and as compellingly as we needed to. And so we were forced by this pandemic to get our story out there. And my advice to the team was, it doesn't have to look fancy. You know, it needs to be current. It can be gritty. It can look very unsophisticated, as long as the story is true and compelling and real about what is happening now. And then we saw, like you did, Mark, all of a sudden, you know, we're a 63-year-old organization, dormant donors coming to us. And for the first time in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, you know, they knew they couldn't help in the traditional physical sense of volunteering, but they wanted to repartner, you know, with us, and they did it through that donation. And then, you know, for instance, we had, with the volunteers that we had, we were really talking to them, you know, those who were committed to us in unsafe condition, I mean, not unsafe conditions where they work, but the pandemic, you know, safety issues, and they're courageous. They want to come in and help. Well, we found out that we had an expert public relations and communications person out in the warehouse, you know, loading up pallets. When we found out what her skill set was and business was slow for her at the time, that individual is now helping us with our annual report and to overhaul our website. You know, so highest and best use, those skill sets, you know, managing things, you know, and taking advantage of the opportunities that a very challenging, you know, circumstance represents. So I can really appreciate, you know, what you're saying there, Mark, and I think there is, you know, a lot that we can use, so long as we prove to be resilient, but we can use this going forward, these learnings. But when it comes down to it, as you said, Mark, we have to be able to fund our operations. And I don't know that our boards and our senior leaders are as used to going through the risk management calculations that these types of circumstances represent, because there are nonprofits that will fail as a result of pandemic-related conditions. And then there's a different risk management calculation as it relates to a J&J and community engagement. But I want to have us talk a little bit more about that risk management that we undertake as leaders in our organizations. And Saadia, if you could start us out with, you know, J&J and the risks that are created, you know, by this pandemic, and risk management generally from your perspective, in terms of, you know, making sure that you've got sustainability and effectiveness and collective impact over the long run.
Yeah, agreed. So there's the you know, our risk management looks different from probably Mark and Catherine, but essentially I'll first talk about, in terms of even like safety and health risks of having volunteers out there. The way we were able to curb that is that whatever corporate J&J policies that we had around travel and interaction, we followed the very same guidelines for our volunteers to avoid any of those safety and health risks. So in terms of actually proving the value of our program to our NGOs during this time, to the employees and the company, I would say we really curbed that through our data. And I think data is just as powerful as storytelling, and I think it's really critical. Where we have a lot of metrics and evaluation processes in place for our programs through our survey, or even collecting data through, employees and our NGOs, and what kind of impact that we're making. And I think that data with the combination of storytelling is really a way that we had to kind of branch out. Like Bernie, you said that we had to kind of think differently, and how to display and sort of showcase some of that work, and that to prove that these programs are really important and critical. So even though I mentioned with NJ&J there is a culture of giving, that doesn't necessarily mean that it translates into money being spent in volunteer programs. So it's really important for us to have that data and that metrics and evaluation to prove the importance of volunteering. So I think that we've sort of, obviously our risk management looks different, but that's sort of how we've managed through that.
Yeah, thank you, Saadia. Yeah, volunteerism, such a big part of our organizations. Catherine, your additional thoughts are around the risk management as it relates to the organization, and in particular, volunteers.
Yeah, this is an area that if there's any area that keeps me up at night, this is it. Protecting our children is above and beyond the most important part of my job, of our job. Protecting our volunteers, our corporate partners, our brand is critically important, and a facet of our organization that we take so extremely seriously. Risk management, risk mitigation, it is an absolute must. So as an example, and this is around safety risks. We have these unbelievable interns that were high school heroes, are alumni of our programming. We've hired 10 so far, 10 interns to our organization, and they're creating these unbelievable initiatives, these coding workshops and these hackathons. And at one point before one of the 24-hour hackathons, we talked about the students and the volunteers that were going to be participating in the event. Now, the volunteers were predominantly from our corporate partners, like Verizon, for example, amazing volunteers. The students, though, were from all over the world. We had students from 5 or 10 different countries above and beyond the U.S. And one of the issues that we had to make sure was, these young people, are they young people? Or are they somebody that should not be at one of our events? So our interns went through a risk management situation where they had to vet every single student. There were 150 students that they had to triple check. And if a student had let's say a Gmail account and not a school ID or a school email address, we had to go back and verify through their parents, through their schools, through their school IDs and such. So we are so, for lack of a better word, obsessed with this risk management piece to ensure that our young people are safe, and that our corporate partners' brands are safe, and that our brand remains strong.
Yeah, so true. And if the CEO and the chairman of the board of trustees are not leading that effort and setting the example for raising the questions, creating the infrastructure, the discipline, then those challenges aren't met, and you have obviously the greater risk of something that could happen that could severely undermine our respective organizations. Mark, your thoughts around risk management?
Yeah, and it gets back to what I said at the beginning of our conversation, which is volunteerism isn't free. It costs money to put infrastructure in place to make sure your volunteers are safe, make sure your volunteers have a great experience, and make sure that they're growing from the experience and that you benefit as a nonprofit. I love Saadia's triple win. That is exactly right. We have to make sure that the organization is benefiting from all these volunteers, and that the volunteer walks away saying, I love that work. That felt so good. It's so good to be part of an organization that's doing all this. And so we collect data. We collect data from our volunteers. We're actually switching to a new database because we felt our old database wasn't working well. But let me go back to the training piece. So, for example, we have a telephone reassurance program where we have people contacting seniors that don't have a lot of outside contact. And this became even more intense, obviously, during the pandemic. A lot of seniors couldn't go anywhere, even if they were mobile. So we had to make sure we put them through a training process where on occasion, some of the seniors that we're working with, we can't get in touch with them. So the rule is if you can't get in touch with them for 3 days in a row, then something's wrong and you've got to elevate the concern. But you wouldn't know that as a volunteer unless your training was done well. And so that's, you know, it's always, as Catherine mentioned, it's really scary when you're dealing with kids, but it's with all these vulnerable populations, you know, there are real scary things that can happen, and you have to make sure that you have the training and the infrastructure in place to address those kinds of concerns when they arise. So, you know, apart from making sure you have insurance, making sure that you're training your staff to train your volunteers so that people are following best practices, that's important. And I'll give you one more example. We did, in the summertime, we did a day of action in Phillipsburg where we had 150 volunteers working to clean up parks in local neighborhoods. And it was a fantastic event. But we had to start the event, make sure everybody had the right tools, make sure they had, you know, good sturdy gloves, because if you're going to go around picking up trash, sometimes there's a broken bottle or a rusty can. You got to make sure that you're protecting your people. So it's little things like that. But you start the day off with training, you end the day with reflection, and people will have a fantastic experience and hopefully stay committed. But I want to add one thing, Bernie, and you're going to get this. Here's a story. I went to one of our trainings for that VITA program where we train volunteers to provide taxes for seniors and low-income folks. And I went up, and this is my, you know, 3rd month at the job. I started talking to them, and I started saying, you know, thank you so much for volunteering at Norwescap. And they looked at me like I was from outer space. And I realized they had no idea who Norwescap was. So we've been running a program for a decade or longer. And these volunteers come every year. We don't even have to ask them. They just show up now. And they had no idea who we were. So it gets back to, and I always look to Junior Achievement. I mean, they are great at branding. They have such a strong brand. And you can hear from Catherine why. They really protect it, and they're really smart about it. But you have to, again, toot your horn when you're a nonprofit. You have to explain why this work is important, what you're doing. Give folks a context. So even if they're just doing filing, they understand that that piece is important to make sure that our work could continue, and making sure that they know who the organization is, because hopefully someday those volunteers will also want to be donors, or they might want to recruit other friends of theirs to volunteer. So it's important for us, again, to make sure we're recruiting and selling ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I mean, there is, with volunteers, there's a continuum, and we can create advocates and ambassadors for life.
Right.
And even into, you know, they can leave a lasting legacy, as those of us who are into fundraising. You know, if we are a good, strong organization and they've had positive experiences and they've made a difference themselves and they see the organization making a difference, then you have gained quite a bit with your relationships, you know, with your volunteers. But it takes infrastructure, it takes planning, it takes effort, and if risk management to ensure that you continue to be effective as an organization isn't part of it, you could be lost. So important lessons for our viewers and ourselves. Where I want to go now in the remaining portion is kind of life as we see it going forward. You know, we've had the shelter in place of the early, months of the pandemic. We now have the vaccine and more hopefulness that we may see a light at the end of the tunnel coming with regard to this pandemic. And what about that, post-pandemic circumstance? What is the new normal that we can expect to see? And I just want to get reaction from the three of you as to life from here and ultimately, post-pandemic. Catherine, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, and it's very simple. I mean, because of, and I always look at the silver linings. It's part of my personality. And because of COVID, we have there's been so much innovation that's been created, through nonprofits and through our corporate partners like J&J, for example. And you hear it from Mark and Bernie. We've heard it from you as well. But I truly believe it's an and strategy. Even when we're past COVID, there may be something else down the road that may be another COVID. But because we've been able to create these innovative ways to meet our stakeholders where they're at, I don't think it's going to go away. I think that we're going to continue to have these virtual digital events and volunteer engagement opportunities. And I think then we'll also be in person, and maybe there'll be a hybrid of both. But I truly believe it's an and strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Saadia, how do you see it going forward? Will volunteering ever be the same?
I think it will look different, but I agree with what Catherine was saying. So our virtual world, it existed before COVID, right? We had these technologies that we were leveraging before pandemic, but the pandemic just accelerated this virtual world, this 100% virtual world that we're living in right now. So I think where we'll find normalcy is kind of a balance between like the old way we were doing things and the new normal. But the virtual piece will definitely stay. So I don't think we're going to go completely back to the way we were for profit organizations and nonprofit organizations. So I think we just have to find a balance and strike that balance. We have a program that in our Talent for Good ladder that I spoke about before, somewhere in the middle, we have this program called Talent for Healthy Communities, and I manage that program myself. And it actually has always been a hybrid model pre-pandemic. It is partially virtual, partially in person. It essentially employees work with NGOs, local NGOs, to address challenges that they have. And so we developed that program really based on the fact that many employees don't want to or can't travel for a long period of time to do skill-based volunteering. And so we created something in the middle for them. So I think, like, if I look at that model, there's going to be many more of those type of models where we're kind of accommodating and striking a balance between that virtual and that traditional volunteering.
Yeah, thank you, Saadia. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, I think that one thing we've learned from this is that in some instances, you can reach a lot more people by doing a virtual event than doing an in-person event. There's fewer cancellations, fewer no-shows. So you can really drive a lot of impact by using technology smartly. The in-person stuff is coming back. It's coming back. We're going to have lots of people in our food bank working in the salvage area because it's really important and it's really helpful. And so that is coming back. The in-person stuff will come back, but I think that we've found some new, and unlike J&J, a lot of us nonprofits aren't as sophisticated as we probably should have been before the pandemic. We were working on it, but the pandemic sort of forced our hand, and now we can do virtually everything virtual. So I think there are going to be ways we can reach more people. Our workshops, we found. Our job training workshops have been better attended than ever. We're not constrained by space or cost. We can do the workshop just fine on Zoom. So I think we're going to, Catherine said, we're going to do the in-person stuff that we used to do, and we're going to find these other opportunities. And I would get back to what Saadia was saying, which is, we would love to have corporate volunteers sort of helping guide our social media strategy, or giving us points and tips on the website, or even poking around the website and seeing which links don't work anymore, and those kinds of things. I mean, there are so many different ways that volunteers can help out an organization, make it more professional, make it more effective. So I think we're just learning the extent of what virtual can give us, and hopefully we'll be able to go back to that in-person stuff, shake hands, give hugs, all the stuff we're used to. But now we have a new tool.
Yes, we do. So we are going to learn from this experience. We have 1 minute to go, so I would ask each of the three of you to give your final last 20-second thought to our viewers as it relates to the challenges and the opportunities surrounding volunteerism. Go ahead, Catherine, you start.
When it comes to volunteer engagement, keep it simple, meet volunteers where they're at, and make risk management an absolute priority.
Yep. Thank you, Catherine. Saadia?
I would say my advice for nonprofit organizations is really don't be afraid to say no or to walk away if it doesn't align with your objectives and visions. Don't look at the immediate gain, but look at how you can develop long-term partnerships and to align with their goals and objectives. And then I would also add for the corporations is really to create, look at triple wins. That was just an example of how we function and how we operate our volunteer program, but also to create a best-in-class program that's both for employees and for the community. So to keep those two things in mind.
Mark?
My last thought is just to remind everybody that volunteerism isn't free. It costs money to build the infrastructure, and we got to have that cycle of recruit, train, support, and then reflect. And on top of that, message to all nonprofits, don't sell yourself short. Sell yourself. It's important that your volunteers know the good work you're doing and where they fit in that process, because every volunteer expands the impact we have on the populations that we serve. So sell yourself and make sure that everybody knows the good work that you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. And I will say, to echo all three of you, embrace volunteerism. Make it just an absolutely intrinsic part of your organization, and ask for help, from your other leaders in the community that you work with. Make sure that you get all the information you can to best manage and support your volunteers, and make sure they're with you forever. So with that, I want to thank this amazing panel. And thank our viewers for listening in today, and we wish everyone the very best in this particular time, and we want to ensure that you are meeting the challenges of volunteerism in our world today. Thank you all very much.